Hopefully, this should do away with the last problems that were previously found. Um, First off, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal-mursaleen, Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. I had a technical difficulty as it relates to the video that I was streaming a few minutes ago. So I'm live streaming now through a different device, yani through my laptop. And so the initial point of this particular talk is concerning or based off a discussion that I had with someone out of the community of Warthuddin Muhammad, and they were using some incorrect understandings to substantiate obtaining Ribaa-based loans, yani obtaining Ribaa-based loans in order to buy a home, and saying that Islam allows this because it's a need. And so the point that I was making before the connection dropped is that one of the unfortunate things that we have occurring in the States on account of callers that I refer to as disingenuous, on account of them not properly explaining what terms mean from an Islamic technical perspective. On the contrary, they take a term and then they translate it, and the term is understood from a Webster's English Dictionary perspective instead of the Islamic technical perspective. So one of the examples that I gave previously was the example of the term majhul, which is translated as unknown. You have some callers that I consider to be disingenuous that don't explain from the Islamic technical perspective, because this particular term unknown or majhul is a term from within the science of hadith, and it has an intent behind it as it relates to the science of hadith, and it's not understood from the Webster's dictionary version of the English word unknown. And as a result, you have people passing rulings: this person's unknown, that person's unknown, this person's unknown, that person's unknown, and they're using a Webster's dictionary understanding of the term unknown and applying an Islamic ruling based off that Webster's English understanding and not based off the Islamic technical understanding. So this is the same thing that you find when you find people saying someone is something is a need, because like I stated, you have two terms, al-darura and al-haja. Both can be translated into the English language as need, but both are not understood exactly from the Webster's English Dictionary of Need. There is an Islamic technical understanding that these two terms carry or hold. And so when you look at those that make the claim that, look, we're in America, we can't get ahead unless we indulge in this or indulge in that. You can't buy a house unless you do this or unless you do that, because this is a need. Then these are individuals that are misunderstanding these Islamic technical terms. And at one point in the conversation, there was a statement, well, what do you expect? Do you expect me to live in an apartment or rent an apartment for the rest of my life, or take this Ribaa-based loan and go buy me a house and have some ownership and be able to leave something behind for my children and thus forth and so on? This was the question. My response was, it would be better for you to be renting an apartment for the rest of your life to indulge in ribaa. And I'm going to expound on that point and make that point very clear, inshallah. But as for now, what I want to do, like I was doing before the interruption, is I want to go through the Islamic technical term for al-darura and al-haja, because this is very important when understanding how these things can be misapplied. And so I started to read from the statement of Sheikh Ubaid al-Jabari in his explanation to, and I have the wrong book in my hand now, in his explanation to منظومة القواعد الفقهية لابن سعدي يعني شيخ عبد الرحمن بن ناصر السعدي رحمه الله تعالى. And like I said before the interruption, that the definition that Sheikh Ubaid is giving, he literally quotes this definition. This definition that he's quoting is literally the same definition that you find in the other books of Qawa'id al-Fiqh, almost verbatim. And so I want to read. He states, ما بلغت حدا إن لم يتناولوا الممنوع هلكا. He states that whatsoever reaches the level that if a person does not utilize it, that which is considered prohibited, then he is destroyed. He is destroyed. Oh, and then he continues, or very close to being destroyed. Very close to that. And then he gives some examples. He states, like the person that is forced to eat, the person that is forced to eat something, yani prohibited, so much so that if he were to remain in a state of hunger or without clothing, then he would perish. He would die. Or, yani, a portion or part of his body limbs would be severely damaged or impaired. He states in this case, that makes permissible the utilization of something that is prohibited. That makes permissible the utilization of something that is prohibited. So what the Sheikh is saying in reality is that if something equates to a mafsada, which we normally translate as harm, if something equates to a mafsada, meaning it's about to bring about the total destruction, ruin of an individual, or severely impair an individual, then this is what you call a darura, which is translated as need. And in this case, it would make something that's normally impermissible permissible. But in order for us to really fully understand that, then we want to understand what is intended by a mafsada. And I have the statement of Sheikh Sulaiman al-Ruhaili from his book, Qawa'id Ta'arud al-Masalih wal-Mafasid. So you understand that I'm not just explaining things from myself, but I'm actually taking you back to the people of knowledge. And Sheikh Sulaiman, he brings a very simplified definition. A mafsada, or which is normally translated as harm, it is whatsoever brings about the ceasing of one of the five fundamental things. Right? Whatever brings about a cease to one of the ceasing of one of the five fundamental things. That these five things being: one, ad-deen; two, an-nafs. Ad-deen, we know what ad-deen is, what's being referred to as one's Islam. The second being an nafs, or one's life. The third being al-aql, or one's intellect. The fourth being an nasl, or one's progeny or lineage. And the fifth being al-mal, or one's wealth, or one's wealth. So when Sheikh Uthaymeen states that that it is that which reaches the level that brings about the that is that which reaches the level that if the haram thing wasn't utilized, it'll bring about the destruction of the individual, or destruction or severe damage or impairment. What is being referred to is one of those five things. What is being referred to is one of those five things: deen, life, intellect, progeny, or wealth. That then becomes a mafsada. And so we see the opposite of a mafsada is a maslaha, which is normally translated as benefit. And the Shaykh brought a simplified definition for that as well. It is whatsoever preserves the goals and intents of the Sharia as it relates to those five things. So whatever directly preserves or protects those five things, or whatever is a means to protect those five things, then it is considered a maslaha, which we translate as benefit. And so you can see by looking at the definition, the Islamic technical definition, that the English language translation that may be understood from the Webster's dictionary is not exactly matching with what the Islamic technical term is. And that's why we have to learn these things based off the Islamic technical perspective, and not just translate it darura to need, and then understand need from a Webster's English perspective. So that is what you call a darura. But then you have what you call a haja. And Sheikh Ubaid, instead of he gives an example. He states, like an individual that is hungry, but he doesn't, and if he is not able to find something to eat, he will not be destroyed. He will not be destroyed on account of him not being able to eat. However, that hunger that he is suffering from will be considered a mashaqqa. It will be considered a difficulty. It will be considered a hardship or adversity upon him. However, he continues, وَهَذَا لَا يُبِيحُ الْمُحَرَّمِ. But this does not make permissible something that is impermissible. It does not make permissible something that is impermissible. And something of this nature occurred with myself when I was overseas in Yemen studying. Because from the trials of talabul ilm, is that you're going to be tested. Loss of wealth, loss of health, loss of provisions, and thus forth and so on. Because it's a noble goal that one embarks upon. So it was during Ramadan. One Ramadan, I ran out of money. I had no money. And I went to the masjid and I broke my fast with the dates and the water that was provided at the masjid. And I literally had no money to actually get a meal. And my friends at that time, everybody was preoccupied. Some people on the other side of town, some people, wherever the case they may be, they were just not around. And I remember praying Isha, stomach growling and hungry, and realizing, man, I'm not going to eat tonight. And walking home, saying to myself, my Lord doesn't forget his servants. My Lord doesn't forget his servants, over and over again as I walked home, basically hungry. But my circumstance what would have been considered a haja, but it wouldn't have reached the level of darura to the point where it would have made permissible me stealing someone's money or stealing someone's property in order to feed myself. Why? Because that hunger wouldn't have led to my ruin or destruction. Yes, it was a difficulty, but it wasn't a life threatening or a limb impairing type of difficulty. But unfortunately, because people are understanding these principles or these terms incorrectly, I could easily see somebody ignorantly saying, listen, Akhi, if you got to just take this or take that, or, you know, take somebody's, if you see somebody who's slipping with their money, you just take enough that you need to go buy something to eat. I can easily see somebody saying that based off how people are understanding these terms. And this is incorrect. This is incorrect. And in fact, in the Sharia, every difficulty does not bring about what you call a takhfif, or lightening or lessening of a duty that must be performed, or a changing in the ruling. Every difficulty does not necessitate that. Now, I want to illustrate exactly what I mean from an authentic narration that is found in the Sahih of Imam Muslim. And it is upon the authority of Abu Hurairah, where a blind man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فقال يا رسول الله ليس لي قاعد يقودني إلى المسجد. He stated, O Messenger of Allah, there is no guide, no one to guide me to the masjid. Now this is again a blind man making a statement. فسأل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يرخص له فيصلي في بيته. So he asked the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam to make a concession for him so that he can pray in his home. So that he can pray in his home. فَرَخَّصَ لَهُ. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave him that concession. فَلَمَّا وَلَّى دَعَاهُ. So when this man turned away, about to walk away, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called him back. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked him, do you hear the adhan for the salat? The man responded in the affirmative, so the Prophet ﷺ stated, فَأَجِبْ. Then respond. Respond to it. Go to the masjid. Now, imagine if we had somebody in this day and time that was of that same circumstance, that lived down the street from the masjid, and was able to hear the mu'adhin call the adhan with his voice, not based off a microphone, but with his voice. Because a person is in that state or condition, being blind like this, you would easily find people tell him, no, you don't have to go to the masjid, you can stay home. You know, you're blind, why put yourself through this difficulty, and thus forth and so on. But the Prophet ﷺ in this narration didn't give the concession for that individual to stay home. He told him, if you hear the adhan, then respond to it. And this is one of the narrations that shows that every difficulty doesn't bring about a takhfif, or a lessening or lightening of the duty. Every difficulty doesn't bring about a takhfif, nor does it bring about a change in the ruling. But there are certain types of difficulties that do that. So unfortunately, because of ignorance as it relates to these technical terms, you find Muslims now passing rulings on the permissibility of things that are haram with the claim that it's a need, and it's not exactly in accordance with these Islamic technical meanings and or definitions. And the reality is that you find this thing occurring because some of these people have what you call a blameworthy leaning towards the dunya. They have a blameworthy leaning towards the dunya, and they are giving preference to this worldly life over the next. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, He states, بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى. Nay, do you prefer this worldly life? But the hereafter is more better and everlasting. Allah, and I rather translate these two verses from Surah Hud. But Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, He says, من كان يريد الحياة الدنيا وزينتها نوفي إليهم أعمالهم فيها وهم فيها لا يبخسون. Give me a second. Whosoever desires the life of the world and its glitter, to them we shall pay in full the wages of their deeds therein, and they will have no diminishing therein. أولئك الذين ليس لهم في الآخرة إلا النار. They are those for whom there is nothing in the hereafter but fire. وحبط ما صنعوا فيها وباطل ما كانوا يعملون. And vain are the deeds they did therein, and of no effect is that which they used to do. So when you find people stating this, especially when we look at the crime of riba in the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, then this is an indication that people are having a blameworthy leaning towards the dunya. When we look at the statement of Allah in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 275, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, He says, now He describes this crime of riba not like any other crime described within the text of the Quran and the Sunnah. He says, الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس. He states, those who eat usury will not stand on the day of resurrection except like the standing of a person beaten by shaitan, leading him to insanity. ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. And he states, Allah continues, that is because they say trading is only like riba, whereas Allah has permitted trading and forbidden riba or usury. Until you get to the verse 278, where Allah says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَذَرُوا مَا بَقِيَ مِنَ الرِّبَا إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. He states, O you who believe, be afraid of Allah and give up what remains from riba, if you are believers. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. And if you do not do it, then take a notice of war from Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then it continues, but if you repent, you shall have your capital sums, to the end of the verse. So the reality is, this particular sin, without a doubt, is from the major sins, and it's being described in a way that no other sin is being described. A person who indulges in it will be like the person who was beaten by the shaitan into insanity, and a person who indulges in it, know that there is a declaration of war from Allah and His Messenger against you. So these particular statements are severe, and for the believer, it will cause him to, have some type of caution before indulging in such, because this points to the fact that this particular sin is destructive. The Prophet ﷺ, he stated, "Ijtanibu as-sab'a al-mubiqat," avoid the 7 destructive sins. And he states, الشرك بالله والسحر وقتل النفس وأكل الربا وأكل المال اليتيم والتولي يوم الزحف وقذف المحسنات المؤمنات الغافلات. He states, the first being polytheism, associating a partner in worship with Allah. The next being sorcery. The next being taking a life without due right. Then after that he states eating usury. And then he continues eating the wealth of the orphan, fleeing on the battlefield, and accusing a chaste, believing woman who would never come near illegal sexual intercourse with illegal sexual intercourse, accusing her of this. So the Prophet ﷺ, he stated, "Ijtanibu as-sab'a al-mubiqat," that these 7 things are from the destructive of sins, the most destructive of sins. So it shouldn't be easy for a person to say this is permissible or riba is permissible. It shouldn't be easy for them to say that, especially if there are people who haven't studied Islam in a more in-depth manner, understanding these technical terms, what a darura is and what a haja is. And when we look at this affair of, and I'm closing now with this point I'm about to make. It is not correct, or it is from having bad thoughts about Allah, that a person would say, if you live Islam to the letter, that you are now holding yourself back from success. And you are not using your intellect. Why? Because this is the only way you can go about acquiring a home here. And to continue the route that you're going is not intelligent. This is from having bad thoughts about Allah, having bad thoughts about his legislation and or guidance that he has revealed from above the 7 heavens. And it's one of the ways that it's having bad thoughts about Allah is that one is now believing that Allah has not provided other routes for a person to live within the confines of that which Allah loves and is pleased with. Now, first and foremost, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, He tells us, Ya ibadi alladhina amanu, inna ardi wasi'atun fa iyaya fa'budun. He states, O servants that believe. He states, indeed, my earth is spacious. My earth is spacious. So to me alone, you worship. So to me alone, worship. And so, if you cannot obtain a portion of this dunya from a halal means in a particular area, then the earth is spacious. Go somewhere else. And when I was speaking specifically about America, Muslims within America, then there is opportunities to buy homes where you don't have to indulge in riba. And I'm going to give some real examples. Now, keep in mind, I'm a person from Los Angeles, California. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. A decent home in Los Angeles, California, not necessarily found in a gang-infested and violent area, you're going to pay $600 on average, between $400,000 to $600,000 for a home. Between $400,000 and $600,000 for a home. This is the reality in Los Angeles, California. But if you're a person that may make $30,000 a year, $40,000 a year, or even $50,000 a year, it may be impossible for you to reach that goal unless you're saving for years and thus forth and so on. However, and I believe it was 2017, I was invited out to Kansas City, Missouri, Masjid Anas ibn Malik, to give some talks. And what I found there in Kansas was shocking. You had 2-story homes, Average home being 4 bedrooms, and the average cost of these homes, and it was right by the masjid. The average cost for these types of homes were $30,000. $30,000. I saw a for sale sign for a home. The home was going for $28,000, and these were homes that were much bigger than the home I lived in California, the home that I grew up in California. So now the question would be, okay, some people say, I want to get ahead in life and I want to get into real estate, and the only way I'm going to get into real estate if I take a Ribaa-based loan. What's wrong with you as a person living in Los Angeles, California, or living in New York, New York City? What's wrong with you purchasing property in Kansas City, Missouri? Property that's obtainable. If you want to remain living in New York, okay, fine. You want to remain living in New York. If you want to remain living in Los Angeles, okay, fine. You want to remain living in Los Angeles. You don't want to relocate. But if you're talking about getting into selling and investing with property, why don't you invest in property in areas where you're capable of buying property without having to indulge in the haram? That Allah has opened that, made that option available for you. And as it relates to Detroit, Michigan, I'm pretty sure most of the viewers know the goal that myself and some other brothers are trying to accomplish in Detroit, Michigan. I visited Detroit, Michigan twice. And when you go to Detroit, Michigan, you see the opportunities. The opportunities are there. In Detroit, Michigan, it's possible for you, me, and whoever else to buy a house for $1,500 from the Detroit Land Bank. What's wrong with a person living in New York buying up property in Detroit, renting out property in Detroit? The average rent, depending on the size of the place, is $700 a month. You buy a home for $1,500, and then you may pour about between $20,000 and $40,000 of renovation into it, and now you have a home that you can either choose to live in yourself and free yourself from paying rent to other people. And if you have a skill or you have education, it will be easy for you to find a job in Detroit, especially if you have a construction, like anything, a trade from plumbing or anything, sheet metal, installing ventilation or construction, framing, whatever the case. You definitely have opportunities there. So if you can't buy a home, say for instance in New York or New Jersey, where we know it's very expensive, without having to indulge in riba, why don't you go to a place like Detroit where you won't have to indulge in that at all? Allah's earth is spacious. Why don't you go to a place like Kansas City where those homes were for $30,000, $28,000? Why don't you go there? Allah's earth is spacious. You have opportunities other places where you don't have to indulge in the haram. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I'm currently living in Salisbury, Maryland. When people ask me, man, how did you get from LA to here? I give them a simplified answer. It was one of those, a man has to do what a man moves. But in reality, it was trying to stay in accordance with that which Allah loves and is pleased with. Selling drugs on the corner is not an option for me. Robbing liquor stores or gas stations is not an option for me. Indulging in riba, it's not an option for me. So I'd rather be here where I'm at than participating in something prohibited in Los Angeles. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. Allah bestows upon us so much blessings, but people act like they can't sacrifice a little bit for Allah. The Prophet ﷺ left Mecca, a place where he was born and raised, and went to Medina because he couldn't establish a deen in Mecca. I'm pretty sure he didn't want to leave his homeland to go to this foreign land. But when you look at what he accomplished by going to this foreign land, there was nothing but benefit in it for him. And you, me or you, as Muslims could be the same way. If we can't become quote unquote successful by way of business and trade and buying property and thus forth and so on in the locality that we're at, then maybe it's just time to get up and go somewhere else within the States. Maybe it's just time to do that. Inna ardi wasi'atun fa iyaya fa'budun. Indeed, Allah, my earth, yani Allah's earth, is spacious. It's spacious. We have people out of that same community justifying credit cards. They say, "Oh, look, akhi, you know, if you don't get a credit card, you can't rent a car." Kadabta. This isn't true. Maybe you're just ignorant of the reality. You can rent a car without a credit card. You can rent hotel rooms without credit cards, unless you're just trying to stay in the Marriott. When I go to Pittsburgh, I rent the Red Roof with my debit card, not credit card, with a debit card. When I was in Montgomery, Alabama, I frequently rented cars from Enterprise with a debit card, and then there was another one, Thrifty Dollar, with a debit card, not a credit card. I've rented cars since I've been here in Salisbury, Maryland, with a debit card, not a credit card. So the point that I'm making is Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, for the one that's seeking it, he does leave open options for people to remain in that which is halal. And my main point or reason for saying this is because something that Farid Abdullah, Sheikh Farid, told me and directed me to as it relates to Dawah. He said, never hammer down on people what they can't do without giving them viable options that replace those things that they can't do. And so I'm giving options for people who make excuses to indulge in what is impermissible. I'm giving you viable options of doing those same things without having to indulge in that which is impermissible. And the reality is, for those that continue to indulge in that which is impermissible while knowing that there are options out there for you to remain within Allah's pleasure and thus forth and so on, then this is an indication that a person has a blameworthy leaning towards the dunya. It has a blameworthy leaning towards this temporal worldly existence, giving preference to it over the eternal, over his eternal well-being in the next life. In the next life. So we have to be conscious of this, ikhwa. And I won't take up too much time because the live feed says 38 minutes and I didn't think I would be here this long. And with that, subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.